Welcome to Moneyweb at Midday, the actuality news show, offering unique insights and in-depth analysis featuring South Africa's top business leaders, newsmakers, and analysts for today's professionals. Your host, Jeremy Maggs.
Hello, and thank you for listening to Moneyweb at Midday. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to put some context around the numbers, some perspective around our politics, and some clarity around the choices facing us in South Africa. A warm welcome at the start of the week. I'm Jeremy Maggs. Coming up on the program today, has the new Agriculture Minister, Willie Oukamp, changed the foot and mouth disease strategy, or is this just all politics? A new warning that linguistic profiling is fueling South Africa's immigration tensions. The global race for innovation is accelerating. Will South Africa develop its own scientific talent or keep importing it? And a landmark copyright ruling has shaken the creative industries, but don't expect the law to change just yet. It's Monday, the 20th of July. Now, foot and mouth disease has become one of the biggest threats facing South African agriculture, disrupting livestock movements, threatening export markets and costing farmers millions of rand. Now, just weeks after taking office, the Agriculture Minister, Willie Oukamp, has already announced a major shift in government policy, opening the door to private vaccine imports and administration, all in an effort to get the outbreak under control. But is that enough, and how quickly can confidence be restored within the community itself? Minister, a very warm welcome to you. And within days of taking office, you moved quickly to settle litigation, allow private vaccine procurement and administration. I just want to know whether that was because you concluded the department's previous policy was either legally indefensible, scientifically wrong, or simply failing very angry farmers.
Jeremy, when I became the minister, I had a good, proper look at what the situation is with foot and mouth and all the measures that's been put in place to curb it. And I've obviously had briefings with legal teams and with experts in the field. And I invited the three litigants against the department, and I said, let's sit around a table and see how we can get around this. The most important thing for me was to see how we can get vaccines, firstly, in the country, faster. Secondly, how we can distribute it faster. And thirdly, how we can vaccinate animals faster. And those three pillars were the core pillars of what we've agreed with each other. There obviously are a lot of challenges, and we knew from day one that government on its own will not be able to take this foot and mouth disease on. We need to have the buy-in and inputs from the private sector as well.
Your predecessor, Minister, defended, though, tight state control over vaccines. You, as you've just said, effectively reversed that position. Was there a specific thing that you saw in your first week or so that persuaded you the old approach was simply a bad one and had to be abandoned?
So in terms of the law, and that is one thing that we said in the settlement meeting for each other, that everything that we do must adhere to the law, and it must allow us to still apply under WOA for foot and mouth free classification. The law is clear. The vaccine can only be implemented or applied by an authorized person, and then the law goes further and says that that authorized person is the director of animal health in the department. But the law does not stop there. The law makes provision for instances where the minister can, with the cooperation of the director of animal health and via her, then expand that delegation of who becomes an authorized person. And that is precisely what we've done. We've said that farmers might apply. They must apply. We can't do that to every farmer. They must apply to become authorized persons. And in that application, provide us with a certain amount of information, which will then allow the director of animal health to approve that application. And that is precisely what we've done here. So I think that is the main shift, is we've looked at provisions that will allow farmers to become authorized people and then apply the vaccinations themselves.
And you're confident, Minister, that the regulation within that system is going to work. Can you guarantee that this liberalization that you're talking about isn't going to produce a chaotic vaccination free for all, which is the last thing I imagine you want?
Definitely. I can guarantee that that is the case. There will not be a free-for-all. Every farmer that wants to vaccinate his animals himself must apply. He must give a certain amount of information. He must also, 5 days prior to injecting his animals with the vaccine, he must give notice thereof. And 14 days thereafter, he must give feedback. I say he, she as well. We've got very good female farmers in the country. But the farmer or the farm manager, whoever applied and whoever was appointed as an authorized person, has got a list of feedback information that must be provided. If that feedback is not provided, that person will not get vaccines. So new vaccine supplies to them will be subject to adherence of that. And if they don't reply and in time, we will follow up with them, as well as the veterinarians that they are working with. So what we've got now, Jeremy, is vaccines coming in quicker, because we've said that government, nor honest to poor biological products, will insist on exclusive import agreements. So that opens a new channel for imports. We've also said that distribution will now be quicker, because in the past, all vaccines had to go via honest to poor biological products before it could be distributed in the country. Now, a private entity that brings in the vaccine can distribute it throughout the country themselves. So it will get quicker to the veterinarian offices, and then farmers can order it from their veterinarian offices. That veterinarian must also provide feedback on who he supplied or she supplied vaccines to. So I'm quite sure that this system is foolproof. We've got an online application system. Nobody will get vaccines. That is not allowed in terms of the law to get vaccines.
But your clock, though, Minister, is ticking. Government says it wants to vaccinate 80% of the national herd at roughly 14 million, I think is the figure I read. Could you tell me how many doses are physically available as we speak today? How many animals are being vaccinated each week? And on what date you expect to reach that 80% target?
So up to now, roughly 13.5 million vaccines came into the country. Roughly 8 million animals have been vaccinated. We are in certain areas busy with the booster vaccination that's going on. The Milk Producers Organization, Mr. Fani Ferreira, contacted me last week. They had certain new outbreaks. We've got 1,385,000 milk cows in the country. They have already received 1.4 million vaccines. So every milk cow has been vaccinated, or dairy cow has been vaccinated once. We have agreed that we will now start with a speedily rollout of the booster vaccination for all the dairy cattle, because we saw the severe effects that this disease have got on the dairy cattle. And it's also important that we then monitor the effectiveness of that vaccine after it's been administered. So if you look at the target of 80%, when we've got already standing at roughly 8 million, vaccines are coming in very fast now. We've got 1.5 million vaccines that came in last week. They are on order from either government or other vaccine producing companies or import companies, roughly 4 million vaccines. So in the past, there was a problem with not having enough vaccines. I think we have crossed that river, and we are now in a place where we can more readily distribute vaccines. And as I said, with what's been put in place, this will now be distributed easier. And I think the big bottleneck was the application thereof. You just simply, the veterinarians, both state veterinarians and private veterinarians, were not enough to go out to every farm. Now the farmer can go there, he can collect his vaccinations, and he can go and vaccinate his animals, which will definitely put us in a much better position to reach our target than what we were before.
And Minister, let me finish with this. You were taken to court, or your department was taken to court, because farmers believed it was obstructing them from protecting their own herds. I think that's common cause. Will you now apologise for the losses caused while government resisted private procurement? And would there be any compensation for farmers who lost animals?
Look, Jeremy, this is a difficult question for me because I was not the minister at that stage. I can only apply my mind on what I can do. And what I can do is to take hands with the sector, to look for plans. My approach has always been one of inclusivity. I believe that we've got farmers that are reasonable and that once you sit around a table with them, you'll get to solutions. And that is exactly what we've managed to do here. So I would not like to pronounce myself on what's been done before I became the minister. I can just pronounce myself on what I am doing and what the department is doing here. So we are going forward with what we've settled here and implemented. I've had discussions with the rest of the industry, with all the farming organizations, Agri-SA, the TLU, FMD response from Richard Morphew. I've met with the ministerial task team as well as with the industry coordinating council on this. Everybody is on the same page. And I think that is a huge step forward, where we're not fighting each other in court, or there's no difference in opinions about the approach. Everybody is fighting in the same dugouts, and we're fighting one enemy, and that is this disease.
Agriculture Minister Willie Oukamp, thank you very much indeed.
Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
Now, as anti-illegal immigration protests intensify, there are growing reports of people being challenged, threatened, or treated as foreigners simply because of the language they speak or the accent they use. The PanSALB African Language Board says this kind of linguistic profiling is inaccurate, it's discriminatory and potentially dangerous in a country with 12 official languages and many languages shared across national borders. I'm in conversation now with Dr. Kyobaka Seshogha, who is Chief Executive Officer at the board. Dr. Seshogha, welcome to you. Is the contention then that people are now being treated as foreigners simply because they speak the wrong language, in inverted commas, or have the so-called wrong accent?
Yes, thank you so much, Jeremy. Yes, as the PanSALB South African Language Board, we have noted, we have received serious reports about people being questioned, intimidated, or treated with suspicion because of their accents and vocabulary and pronunciation, especially in particular to the variety of African languages that they speak. So we've received some of those reports, and people have been asked, Jeremy, to pronounce certain words, identify particular objects, and to demonstrate their knowledge of a South African language as a test of their nationality.
Is this an isolated occurrence, do you think, in a few cases, or are you concerned that it might become a trend?
Jeremy, it's a few cases, but we are concerned that it might become a trend because we see these reports escalating even to other provinces.
Do you think, or from what you've heard, Doctor, is this mainly verbal intimidation, or is it going a step further, perhaps, or potentially? In other words, could people be denied access to services or removed from communities or even physically threatened because of the way in which they speak?
Jeremy, the reports that we have received, it's based on testing. They're testing, language testing of the accents. You know, people are being asked or intimidated if you can't pronounce a certain word or a certain part of your body in an African language. You get intimidated. So we can say that this is really, really not only an accent problem, but also the pronunciation when people mention certain things in a different variety of South African language. It is also taken as proof of their citizenship, which is really, really not correct.
So the deeper problem is that many South Africans would wrongly associate certain African languages with foreign nationality.
Yes, Jeremy, and also not understanding that even our official languages can be found in other parts of African countries. Like isiXhosa, you can find it in Zimbabwe. There are speakers of these languages in other African countries.
And that makes accent-based identification particularly dangerous, and even more so in this heightened time of intimidation and uncertainty.
Definitely. And we as the PanSALB African Language Board, we are trying to teach South Africans that accent is not a determiner of nationality. So we should really, really teach South Africans that accent should not determine if a person is South African or not.
Is there a point, do you think, where questioning someone about their language crosses a line from suspicion into unlawful discrimination? Or is it the moment that happens you are discriminating unfairly?
The moment it happens, Jeremy, you are discriminated. Remember, the Section 9 of our Constitution prohibits unfair discrimination on the ground of language. So the moment you start to discriminate a person on the basis of their language, you are really, really creating unnecessary tension.
This is a difficult one for you to answer, I guess, because it probably falls without or beyond your remit. But do you have any suggestion as to what a person might do if confronted by protesters and ordered to prove their nationality because, as we're discussing, the way in which they speak?
Jeremy, first of all, when you are confronted with that, you should try and be calm and also try and explain to the people that they do not have jurisdiction to question you on the basis of immigration. So secondly, we should also try by all means not to fight back. As you say, this falls beyond my scope of work, but also it goes with us as South Africans and citizens, knowing when to discharge certain responsibilities, and that of checking accent doesn't really fall within our domain as citizens.
I'm wondering whether the board has approached the police or even Home Affairs or possibly even protest organisers themselves as to alerting them to them and maybe asking for some type of concrete action to be taken.
So what we have been doing, we have been releasing things that can also, like language awareness campaigns that we have been doing to also teach South Africans about the dangers of linguistic profiling. We are also pursuing structured engagements with the relevant institutions that you have mentioned so that we can also start maybe collaborating on some of these issues so that we can also help everybody understand the importance of language and multilingualism in South Africa.
And the problem here, and this is the last question, if the practice is allowed to continue, one imagines we are at risk then of turning our multilingual identity, as you put it, into a real tool of exclusion and xenophobia rather than inclusion.
Exactly. So we really have to teach ourselves to be tolerant of each other's language, Jeremy. It all begins with that. As long as you are in South Africa, you will be confronted with the multilingual languages. You will be confronted with the reality that South Africa is a multilingual country and we need to learn to tolerate other languages rather than using them against our people.
Dr. Keobaka Seshogge is the Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-South African Language Board. I do appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're listening to Moneyweb at Midday.
Now, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, advanced manufacturing and clean energy, all reshaping the global economy. And that's a good thing. But millions of South Africans, I think, remain disconnected from the science and technology driving that change. So it does beg the question, are we building a country that produces new ideas or one that will remain dependent on innovation developed elsewhere? Someone who's applied his mind to that is Dr. Sahir Parker, who's a senior research specialist in the Centre for Science and Society at the HSRC's Equitable Education and Economics or Economies Research Unit. Sahir, welcome and thank you very much indeed. This is such a relevant and important issue that you raise. Are we producing future innovators or merely training people to consume foreign technology?
Thank you so much for that question. I think it's a requirement to do a little bit of both. I think we need the tremendous innovative potential of our young people to drive our economy forward, to grow our knowledge economy. We also need the rapid development of job-ready skills so that our young people are able to be absorbed within the labor market economy. Our knowledge economy is moving rapidly forward, but structural inequalities in South Africa, related to geography, income, schooling, and access are leaving millions behind. The influence of the digital and spatial divides are stark, and the public, through our South African public relationship with science survey, tells us that the public is eager to engage. But when the primary concerns are immediate survival issues, we cannot expect people to engage with high-tech knowledge economy issues when clean water and reliable electricity are the pressing issues. So as a result of this, I think it's important that we point our focus to developing both high-tech knowledge economy participants as well as skilled people that are able to drive our labor market economy.
And we're not there at the moment. That is very clear. So is the failure in our schools, our universities, is it government policy, or simply the way in which science is communicated?
I think the challenge at the moment is to ensure that the sciences reaches everyone. And this is why science literacy, and particularly issues relating to the public understanding of science, becomes so important. When science and science literacy is concentrated in wealthy, urban, highly educated areas, science stops being a public good. It really becomes an exclusive privilege. And so in this sense, true social justice means translating the bigger portion of the South African public that is interested in science into equitable access so that science can bring true relevance and true meaning and true impact to the lives of ordinary South Africans. This will help us to shorten the gap between education and true and meaningful reduction in inequalities, but it also helps us produce a less deeply fractured society in a way that technology can decrease the gap in inequality.
How do you persuade then young people to study science when so many qualified graduates are simply struggling to find work?
I think that's two sides of an equation. The one is creating the absorptive capacity within our economy to take in young people and ensure that there's an employment capacity. On the other hand, we need to ensure that, and we need to make sure that we recognize not everyone wants to be a scientist, but everyone has a responsibility to understand and engage with the sciences. The science engagement must become bidirectional. It must move out of the labs and onto the kitchen table and onto the street corners to ensure that it doesn't just become the act of teaching a list of facts, but a way in which we can directly connect the lives of ordinary South Africans to the processes of science and technology, how this influences things like climate change, health, food security, and the many, many different structural challenges that are affecting young people and the ability to participate in a growing and changing economy.
And ultimately, like with most things in life, it all comes down to money, doesn't it? So if we have limited funding, where does it go? Elite scientific research or simply basic scientific literacy for the wider population?
I think we need to find the middle ground, Jeremy. We cannot treat science engagement and science as if it was something that only the highly intellectual or wealthy can access. We need to move it from a smaller share of our population to 100% of our population. To truly build a resilient economy, we must treat science and science engagement the way we do basic infrastructure like roads and electricity and water. We must invest in developing the infrastructure, and we must invest in maintaining the infrastructure. Because if we ensure that science and scientific knowledge is democratic and democratized, every South African from the deep rural villages to urban centers will then have the agency to participate in, to actively shape, and to decide the way in which science can influence their lives. And there's so much to be gained by changing our perspective on the way in which science can influence everyday life.
And let's assume to a degree we get there. It's all very well to have that democratized approach that you're talking about, but the reality is at some point that system has got to turn research into companies, products, and most importantly, jobs, right?
We in South Africa have a lot of progressive national science policies We've got different agencies that are responsible for converting the products of the knowledge economy into marketable resources. And so I think we need to develop both sides of that coin, the human capital on the one hand that will develop the innovations that we require today and in the future, and then the market and strategic intelligence that will allow that to walk through R&D processes towards the development and towards the commercialization of the product of our knowledge economy. We are succeeding at certain ends of that equation, but from the human development and capacity development point of view, I think there's a fair ways to go. And when those two paths meet, I do think and I do wish and I do dream that that will be the day we will all be here to witness South Africa rise in terms of putting our science and technology capital to work.
Fair point, but those paths have got to meet sooner rather than later. What would South Africa's economy look like in a decade if scientific participation, as you're suggesting, simply doesn't improve?
It is the darker end, I think, if we don't capitalize on what it is our science and technology is able to contribute. South Africa is a highly equipped, highly developed economy when we look further north on the continent. And so we simultaneously stand as a lighthouse on the continent, but we've got our own challenges and our own deficiencies that we've got to fill. And so as a result of that, I think if we do not invest today, it does mean that in 10 years' time, our economy will suffer for it. The rest of the world is in a highly advanced technological race. And South Africa needs to invest significantly to ensure that we can compete effectively in that race, to ensure that our ideas and our African concepts get put on the world stage in a meaningful way.
Dr. Sahir Parker, thank you very much indeed from the Human Sciences Research Council.
Moneyweb at midday. For all your up-to-date stories.
South Africa's Constitutional Court has delivered an important ruling on the long-running Copyright Amendment Bill and Performers Protection Amendment Bill. Now, some disputed provisions, as I understand it, survived scrutiny, while others have got to return to Parliament. But the existing copyright systems remain unchanged for now. So what does this ruling mean for musicians, tech companies, and I guess the broader public? I'm going to talk now to Chola Makhamate, who's General Manager for Legal at the Southern African Music Rights Organization. We probably know it better as SAMRO. Chola, a warm welcome to you. The Constitutional Court, did it strengthen then copyright reform or expose how deeply flawed these bills remain?
Thank you for having me on your show. Look, I think if you follow the history and how we've interacted with it, is that we fought quite ferociously against the bills for a good number of years, and we're quite happy that the bill did find themselves and were referred to the Constitutional Court. Disappointed because obviously, as you've indicated, only Section 12D 1-5 was found to be unconstitutional, and then the court made a ruling on the rest, and we obviously have to deal with those consequences. Because whilst we understand that there are issues that the court is trying to address from a redress perspective, but I think the manner in which the bills were drafted did not take into account a lot of the nuances and the issues that are required to be overcome in administering copyright for a lot of people in a lot of different sectors.
If the court did not reject the proposed so-called fair use provision, why does SAMRO remain so concerned about it?
Look, the issue that we've had with the fair use provision, which is an exception to copyright. So in our jurisdiction currently, with the current laws, we have fair dealing, which is a closed list of exceptions to copyright. So when I say that it's in an instance where your exclusive rights to allow others to do certain things with your copyrighted work is limited by exceptions stipulated in the Act, which currently is a closed list. The issue that we had with the fair use provision is that we didn't believe and still don't believe, in the way it's currently drafted, that it meets what we call a 3-step test, which is in the Berne Convention that South Africa is a signatory to, where that step will indicate, and if the exception meets the test, will indicate whether or not it should be adopted into law. We're still of the firm belief that it's not appropriately drafted, but obviously the court disagrees. What is heartening is that it didn't make necessarily a firm decision on the constitutionality and left the door open for the exception to be tested in court. So essentially, we'll test whether or not there is infringement of copyright or not based on the fair use defense when we take the matter to court.
Have you quantified the specific financial harm that broad fair use could cause composers and songwriters?
Look, I mean, for an organization like SAMRO, we did do an economic impact assessment for our organization, and the numbers were actually quite staggering. So we do a projection of the sort of revenue growth would have over a number of 5 years, and we're looking at losses in the hundreds of millions if we don't put in the necessary measures to protect our members' rights. So our bottom line will take a knock. We will obviously have to adjust as an organization and deal with any challenges that may arise where users of copyrighted works do claim that there's a defense of fair use. But obviously it's all determined on a case-by-case basis.
One of the other issues which is interesting is technology companies and their use of artificial intelligence to train systems on copyrighted music, and I understand without permission. Should they be allowed to do that?
No, they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Not just technology companies, any user should not be allowed to use copyrighted works for any purpose without getting the requisite license. And the problem that we do have as well is that AI is currently not regulated in this country. And there are a number of cases internationally that have been taken to court where these big tech companies have been found wanting in terms of how they're using copyrighted materials to train. So it is a big concern for us. And like I said, look, it's not the end of the road with regards to these bills in the Constitutional Court, really. What I like about this country is that there are other opportunities, potentially in other pieces of legislation, any regulation coming up on AI, any policy framework that can be put together to deal with issues surrounding AI and how it is being used by big tech companies. And
broadly, what provisions then does Parliament need to rewrite before your organisation would support the bill?
So the referral to the Court was very limited. So the whole bill, not all the provisions of the bills were referred to the Constitutional Court. It was a limited referral, and on the basis of the limited referral, the Court only found that sections 12D1 to 5 were unconstitutional, and therefore those need to be sent back to Parliament. Those are the provisions relating to educational materials. So the concern there was, textbooks could be just copied en masse, and that would obviously infringe the rights of those copyright holders. So that's being sent back. What transpires on the ground in Parliament is another issue, and how that is dealt with is another issue. So we're still looking into how to do that. But if there are opportunities and avenues to challenge certain provisions that we don't agree with, we will take those opportunities in whichever form.
And just finally, and forgive a very broad, vague question to a complex issue, but obviously you've applied your mind to what a genuinely balanced copyright settlement would look like in practical terms. Can you give me the headline there?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Copyright needs to be balanced by taking into the interests of content creators, but also ensuring that there is access and an ability for innovation to occur in any society.
Thank you very much indeed. That is Chola Mahamate, who's General Manager for Legal at the Southern African Music Rights Organisation. And on that note, we are going to end today's program. You've been listening to Moneyweb at midday, and we are here every weekday at noon with the latest in current affairs, the economy and policy. You can always catch the podcast version a little later. Thank you for making us part of your day. Until next time, goodbye.
Listen to the daily live stream of Moneyweb at midday, or download episodes on moneyweb.co.za, the Moneyweb app, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or follow Moneyweb News on social media for more updates. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.